Hello and welcome to The Novice. Today my guest on the show is Bijan Vaez. Bijan is a good friend of mine, and he's a co-founder of a company called EventMobi, a company him and his brother started when Bijan was still in college. And that's also where Bijan and I met. Back in the day when they started this company, mobile was so new that they spent a couple of years just educating their customers on where they thought mobile was going. But when finally mobile took off, so did their company. And today we talk about this experience, what it was like to start a company with just your brother, barely any money, go from nothing to a successful company that made 10 million in annual recurring revenue, and what that taught Bijan and where he is now. After starting his company and doing it for 10 years, he took a little bit of a break to focus on his own health. Then he started helping companies as a part-time CTO. Way before that was a cool thing to do. And eventually, he even became a venture partner with one of the venture firms in Vancouver, BC. And now Bijan is focused on a new company in the AI space because we see AI as this new revolution happening in the same way that mobile happened back in the day. There's a ton of opportunity. And if you're technical, you can take advantage of it right now. So listen to this fantastic episode with Bijan. You're going to have a lot to learn. It's a lot of fun, and you're going to have a good time. Without further ado, Bijan Vaez. My goal with this is just kind of chat about your life experience with startups, figure out what your journey looked like, and have like a story for aspiring founders and new founders so they can get visibility into what startups are really like outside of the 1% that you see on TechCrunch, like the outlier stories, the Ubers of the world, right? Because there's a whole bunch of startups that are still doing really well, or doing right.
Yeah.
And the people live their life, but they look nothing like the social network movie, or they do in part look like social network movie, but not in its entirety. So I thought it'd be just fun to chat about it and talk about how you guys got through, what is it, 14 years of EventMobi.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, I know, crazy, right? Like, you're a grandpa now. That's it. It's time to retire.
I know. I hope so. Fingers crossed soon. Yeah.
In a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that wisdom will eventually kick in, and the millions will pour in, and life will be fantastic.
Or we keep chasing. That's it.
Oh, we keep chasing. It's still fun.
Yeah.
It's the journey, right? It's not the destination.
Exactly.
So let's try to rewind back 14 years, where you and your brother started EventMobi. You were still in college. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He, I think, just finished some sort of a gig after graduation and realized that was not for him. Was that how the story went? You want to tell the story from the beginning a little bit?
So my brother's a builder as well. He's a computer engineer. He graduated right in the middle of the dot-com crash. And so for him, it was kind of like there were no jobs available, and which is crazy to think of in tech. And so he just started building stuff on the side. And at the time, he was doing a lot of hardware kind of projects. Really, really hard to get off the ground, especially back then when there was no community to support and help you figure out how to launch a startup out of your basement. And so I was kind of along for the ride as a teenager, just like watching what he was doing, kind of helping him with different things. Eventually, he worked at AMD, and then he went to NVIDIA. He got poached into there, which, you know what, if he stayed there now, that would have been a whole different story to this life story of his. But
somebody did a poll on NVIDIA employees asking how many of them are millionaires, and it wasn't just like, "Are you a millionaire now?" It was more like, "Do you have 1 to 5 million? Do you have 5 to 10 million?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think when I was there, and I was working at a startup out of their campus for a while. It was like the stock was like $6. I think it was like nothing. It was and it was funny because I would work in their cafeteria, and then I'm pretty sure their IT team saw me, and like I would come in every day with my brother and just perch up there, and it's kind of like my co-working space, and they would shut off the power to the to the pillars that I was connecting
Hmm.
to. So I have to keep literally every 15 minutes just like getting up and moving to a different pillar. But
Wait, so
it was
he
a good
was
time.
working there, but you were like just co-working at a space for
Out of their
free.
calf. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He would bring me
nice.
in as a guest every day, and then I just sit in the cafeteria and just work.
That's awesome.
And like, yeah, those different startup ideas. But yeah, nothing really kind of worked. He eventually started doing his MBA part time. And then this was one of his MBA project ideas that he was vetting with his classmates and his professors. And he threw the idea at me like he usually does. And I was doing an internship at AMD at the time, really bored out of my mind, and was like, you know what? Yeah, I can take a second job on. So let's do this. And so, I would help him out with everything from graphic design to building out the marketing website to coding up some back then HTML5 kind of web apps, and really kind of like fun stuff on and trying to validate this problem space, which was okay, this mobile shift is happening, and where are the biggest opportunities and who is underserved? And I think for him and what he did every day, being uh, he was kind of on the product engineering side at NVIDIA as well. So he used to go to a lot of conferences. They have all these spec sheets and binders and like stuff you have to carry around all day. And so he's like, you know what, this would be great. This is perfect format of content to be on mobile. And if we can help with that transition, like there's an opportunity. And so he kind of leveraged that in his MBA class to kind of validate it, found some early customers, and we just started building. And that was really fun, but
So the
no
simple
money.
idea was, let's take all this paper that I have to lug around, put it on a mobile phone because it was still early. iPhone's already come out, but
It
it was
was
still like an early iPhone.
it was the actually we started working on this pre iPhone because he had the Windows I think it was Windows CE kind of
Mm,
like little touch screen with the
right, right.
stylus kind of thing. And like the iPhone was announced, but I think when we really started pushing was when the App Store got announced. And that's when we were like, oh, we should go all in on this. I think this is going to be huge. But at that time, we were actually doing cross platform mobile, which was the Palm Pilot was still around, Blackberry was still around, um, iPhone was just getting going, and then there was the Windows CE stuff. So you kind of had to build like 4, 5 completely different code bases just to get an app out there.
We might be all over the place here, and we'll eventually get through the story. But tell me, uh, what was it like? That's insane to even think about it. I remember those days, right? And not only you had all these platforms had different sizes, regulations, needs, right? And at the time, it was just the two of you, and you didn't have like interns or anything, and you were trying to code this mess, right?
Yeah, there was actually
Describe
a
it.
third. There was initially it was my brother and one of his classmates that had actually started on this, and he was also an engineer at Motorola, and they were kind of working. So he was doing a lot of kind of the Java SDK work with kind of some of the BlackBerry apps and the Palm apps, and then I was doing a lot of the web work. Over time, about I would say 6 to 9 months in, that other co-founder was like, you know what, I can't. I have kid responsibilities, and I'm getting promoted in my work, and
Hmm.
like I just can't take this on. It's too much risk. And so we kind of transferred his co-foundership to me, and I jumped in, and even though I was already working quite a bit, but we made it a little bit more formal for me to kind of jump in. And then after a while of trying to get all these apps going and all these different platforms and code bases, I think we just said, you know what, let's simplify and just use mobile web because we think that's going to be where everything converges over time. Like all of these phones all have web browsers, regardless of their base platform. And yes, it's not the perfect experience that you want to build, but it's good enough, and it kind of helps with the distribution, and especially explaining mobile to people, which is really hard. Like back then, it
Hmm.
wasn't, downloading an app wasn't as easy as just like go to the App Store, hit install. It was like, all right, here's a Java SDK bundle, and it has to match your, version on your OS, and there's all sorts of stuff that for non-technical people, it was a non-starter back then. Um, so we actually just used that constraint to focus on just simplifying and going to mobile web because I could just build one code base and try to validate the product.
And at this time, did you have any users, or is still Bobak basically trying to figure out how to carry his files to conferences on the phone?
Yeah, he would. We had a few kind of pilots, let's say. So some of his classmates, I think Xilinx is a big hardware company in Silicon Valley back then, and they were having a conference, a sales conference. So they're like, yeah, you know what, come and try it out there. And so we use these as kind of deadlines for ourselves to be like, hey, let's just make sure we get something in time. We'd always miss the deadline, but we'd have something to show. And so if for that conference, I don't think we got to distribute the app, but we had a beta ready, and like my brother would just go to the show itself and just grab people on the show floor and show them, be like, would you use this? What do you think about this? And talk to them about it and get their feedback to see if we should keep building or what we should build and how to move forward with it. And so there's a lot of that actually. I would say probably, I don't know, I want to say almost a year almost of that. And then he was flying around trying to find where, and this is pre-SaaS, pre-growth playbooks, and so he was literally flying to Miami to meet with student conference associations, and he would go to like essentially find different ICPs, go meet them where they are, and then try to validate if they would actually purchase or use an app like this and see how to kind of break into it and what segment was worthwhile going after. That took a long time. And eventually, he was doing a lot of education in the space of just like talking about what mobile is going to do for events and why you need a mobile app and that whole piece, which is actually kind of key because similar to where AI is now, it's like people know it's important, but they don't really know how to use it. And so whoever leads with education, you're just going to get people interested in me like, okay, well, you kind of know what you're talking about. And so we started getting some inbound coming in. I think yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So that's a great point, right? Was that this education? Where were you at that point in, I guess, life cycle of mobile and everything moving to the phone? Was he still trying to explain that phones are going to be epic? Or was it a bit simpler? Oh, like it was so basic that you still had to explain that like mobile phone is going to be important. Never mind all the details of moving the applications on the phone. It's literally
exactly.
like, this is the thing you'll carry with you the whole time.
Yeah. And I think that's why I see so many similarities with where AI is now, because you're dealing with that conversation right now where people still think AI is just a gimmick. It can't actually do anything. It's not smart. And like, you have to open up broadly to understand how the space is moving, right? Where the puck is going to be in a little while. And that was the same thing where, one of the points where we thought we should give up where we went to an event planner and we're trying to convince her that this was, something that's important to her business, and she was losing sponsorship revenue, trying to find a way to keep, her audience engaged at her event. And we're talking about mobile, and she's like, I don't understand why you guys are doing this. Like, I'm so busy. I have so much stuff. I can't deal with this stuff. You know what? We don't even care about mobile. We have a whole bucket that we keep outside of the rooms. And so when you go into the room to listen to a talk, we get you to drop your phone into the bucket so you don't disturb anyone. And we're just like, oh my God, like people don't get it. Like this mobile thing, like you can't stop people from not having their phone on them. It actually can be really useful if they bring it into an event and start engaging with the audience there and engaging with the speaker. And so it was really interesting. And at that point, we're like, maybe we have like, we don't know how to break through this mindset. But that was an interesting timing piece, right? That's you can't time the market, but you kind of have to be in the market to kind of understand these nuances.
But that's very interesting. And I see those parallels with AI indeed, because you're basically saying, hey, we see this phone as fundamental building block of what's going to be in the future. And you're going to carry it with you and you're going to use it and you're going to love it, right? And the people in the space still think of like, no. We've been doing this differently for 20 years. Phones are a distraction. And so what do you do? Do you, and we'll get to your story, I promise, but like, what do you do at that point? Do you just realize that it's not worth trying to explain something to somebody who inherently doesn't yet understand it, and you just go and focus on people who do have a spark in their eye for something new? What was your strategy in terms of finding somebody who's easy to work with, will actually sign up with you?
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to talk about strategy. Back then, you're just like struggling to find anybody to give you, any interest or validation. So it's just like, just keep trying heads down,
Hmm.
battering your head against the wall until something happens, right? And so I think we just kept trying. We're like, okay, well, if that's not going to work, we kind of have to figure out how to give ourselves confidence to keep talking to the next customer and that this isn't going to be what all conversations are going to be like. And there's just that level of persistence. I think there was no strategy necessarily there at the time. Um, and then I think we got a big break eventually when there was like a Singaporean trade association that like published something about us in like a local newspaper for event planners. And then we started getting some inbound calls of like, people willing to like pay us money for this thing. And they had some budget to experiment with mobile. And so they're like, oh yeah, well, and it was really interesting because of the technology choice that we made to go mobile web and not go to like 4 different code bases, our development costs and like time to deploy was really, really short. And so it helped because a lot of these events that had really small budgets, they didn't want to go to a consulting agency and spend $40,000, $50,000 on a mobile app that they didn't even know was going to be useful. We were like, and we didn't know how to price properly at the time, but we were like, I don't know, $500. Like, is that too expensive? We don't really know. But for them, it was easy to say yes because like, oh, this is a no-brainer. Like, I don't have to worry about blowing my budget. I can just try it this year and see how it works. And for us, it gave us that validation of like, okay, we actually have real users now, and this is actually really useful for people. But so that was really good, and got us going. And then soon after and this was pretty much just about when we were about to run out of money too. My brother had cashed out his 401k, put everything in for about a year. When I went back to school for my 4th year and I was still working part-time, everything was slowed down quite a bit. So he made the risk of just like, he hired an intern and he hired one full-time engineer to kind of keep some progress going. And we'd gone to a point where pretty much we were running out of cash, and he was maybe 2 months from just like complete zero in his bank account. And we started getting some early breaks. We're like, we got one customer that paid, $1,500. We're like, oh my God, okay, we can pay like 2 weeks more salary. And then, the next week we got 2 customers. The next week we got 4 customers. The next week we got 8. And then, soon, a few months after that, we ended up actually getting Disney coming to us and saying, hey, we have a big conference where we bring all the Disney Club members together, and we want to experiment in this. Like, but I'm assuming they couldn't pull what they needed internally to get it done, even though they wanted to. And so whoever was on their team was brilliantly smart because they knew that they could just go to a startup, boss them around, pay nothing for it, and it would be a lot faster and cheaper than trying to do it internally. And then they could validate what they needed, and then go and build it in-house if they wanted to. Which I don't know if they ever did, but they became like our big design partner effectively to build out the real core of the features that we needed to build out. And so we'd be on calls with their team weekly, feature requests, validating UX and playing through it. And that was a big break for us because once we could slap that we worked with Disney on our homepage, it kind of opened up the doors for a lot of people to be like, oh, okay, these guys are doing it. Let's give them a try. And then, the story from here on is pretty much like it just, this was a 2.5 year grind to this point of like $0. And then we spend the next 5-6 years trying to hire salespeople fast enough to just pick up the inbound phone calls. So it was
Before we fast forward into the future, let's talk about this early time a bit more. How do you feel about this pricing issue where you didn't know how to charge? You were a startup, so for you it's like $500 is a win. At the same time, we're talking about the era where there were people who made millions by building 3-day long apps, and I mean something you can build in the weekend, and then charging $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 for that to
yeah.
companies simply because they knew that the companies had no idea what it even took to build an app, right? So they could charge whatever. I mean, obviously it worked out good for them. Eventually it worked out great for you, but in terms of giving advice to future founders, right? Do you have any suggestion on how you find that pricing without basically sacrificing your potential encounter with these amazing customers?
Yeah, I mean, there's I have a lot more knowledge about sales than I had back then. So now I approach things very, very differently. And I approach things from a working backwards perspective of even like when I start something new, I'm always like, okay, what is the exit that I want? And why am I
Hmm.
even doing this thing? And then I only entertain price points or contracts or customers that will serve me to that point. And if they don't, I'm very quick to be like, okay, this is not worth working on. Or even though this could be a business, I don't want to spend time on it because this is not worthwhile. And so it's easy to make those decisions. But back then, I knew nothing, and I was just looking for any opportunity. And so you kind of do it a little backwards, but it also does work where you start somewhere low and you have to keep very quickly moving up market and understanding. Every sale you make, you kind of add a little bit more to test the waters, and then you start learning. Okay, which one of your customer segments has what price affinity, where the limit is and what the decision making criteria is. So we like very quickly learned, what the budgets were that teams could just put on a credit card without needing to ask for approval. And so that took our sales cycle from like 90 days to like 7 days, because we're like, oh, if they can just put it on a credit card and they don't have to ask anybody, like, let's just focus on that and keep the price point just under that.
So what was the biggest amount at the time that teams could actually put on a credit card?
I think it was under 5,000. It was either under 5,000 or under 2,000. I don't remember what the number was, but it hasn't changed much probably to this day. But it was a good point for us to start without needing to build a sales team that actually had a sales motion. It was just like quick sales, jump on a demo, immediately they saw value, send them something to put their credit card into, and then like, you're off to the races. That was really, really good in the early days.
No, that's a great advice for everyone out there building companies, because especially as a solo founder, a young founder, you have no idea, right? You think, how much money do I need? And you say, well, okay, well, $20 would do, I can buy a latte. But really, a company might be willing to pay $20,000 for the same feature or whatever it is you're making. And you
Yeah,
have no
exactly.
idea. And almost like if you come with them with $20 ideas and they're willing to pay 20,000 for it, they won't take you seriously
It's
because
exactly,
of
yeah.
all the
We
work
learned
that
that
has to
very
go on
quickly.
their end.
Yeah, well, we learned that very quickly because, as I was saying in the beginning, when we were priced at, a couple $100 or 500 or something, we actually had quite a bit of churn, and mainly we realized, okay, well, and I forget where we got to this learning or when it hit us, but I think it was as we were increasing our price point, we just started noticing like, okay, well, these customers, we actually gave them a crazy deal. They get a huge amount of value for it, but they churn or they don't actually use the product properly, or they don't really care about like maximizing this product that
Hmm.
they have. And then, these customers that are struggling to pay $2,000 for this thing, and maybe it doesn't even add that much value to them, but they're like really into it. They're getting their whole team in, they're doing training, they're calling us all the time. And so like what was that difference there? And I think we very quickly learned it's like, oh yeah, if you price it too low, then your customer feels like there's less value inherently in the product because it's priced so low. And so they don't take it seriously. They don't really put the effort in to push it internally. And you kind of get stuck in that motion. And so it's just a natural human thing. Like you spend more money on it, you're going to give it more of your attention. And like, you just have to convince the customer that it's worth that much and to cough up that much money. And then it just helps with adoption actually in that sense. Right. And so if somebody internally has made that decision to spend $10,000 on a piece of software and their job is on the line because they have that on their books, like they're going to be motivated to like push it
Hmm.
internally to like show people that it was a useful decision of why they bought the software.
And I think you just answered my next question, because I think you kind of lucked out that you were bored at your internship and then you got to join your brother and one thing led to another. But I had the same experience where, I was at an internship, but most of the time I wasn't actually working. I was playing foosball, I was hanging out with people. And maybe that's what they were trying to do, to show me how good of a lifestyle I could have. But I was just like literally bored most of the time. And but maybe it's related. My question was, why do you think the interns aren't being used? And especially engineering interns from University of Toronto, right? It's a pretty good university. Like you've got brains, you can do things, and yet, and maybe that's the thing, because interns aren't valued because you're paid so little as an intern. Well, if you didn't do anything, what's the big deal, right? You versus
Right.
a guy getting $500,000 a year, like they should be worked more. But like actually, that all this leads to is interns leaving and starting companies. So
Yeah, and I think it's a weird phenomena of like big corporate and motivation around how they bring in these programs in and how they source and find and just training people to get use out of interns or the programs, I think is a whole different challenge. But like, I mean, we started working together during that time, and that's how, we got to know each other. But like the original bones of the company was built off of interns that and classmates that I had found at University of Toronto, and that's how we kept our burn low. Was like, we had I had a friend who was doing an internship at IBM, and I pulled him in on the weekends, and he had another friend who was at IBM, and he's like, okay, he's also bored in his internship. Like, why don't we all just hack together on the weekends? And like, I gave them something to hack on, and
mhm.
we couldn't really pay them properly because we weren't making money, but my brother would go and get. We were working in Chinatown, downtown Toronto at the time, at a co-working space, and like every time we'd do a release, he'd go and get like a pack of Chinese pastry buns, and they were like 40 cents each, so it was like super cheap, and everybody loved it because they're delicious, and like that was the way that we'd celebrate every little win. And it just like kept us motivated and moving. And then even when we could hire and had the money to, we still opted to find the best of the best at the earliest time. And these are people who are super hungry, super motivated, extremely smart. And, we gave them an outlet to do some really, really good work and learn. And, a lot of them made some mistakes, but they learned from those bits and then went on to do much, much bigger and better things. We had one of our first interns, I think, ended up designing YouTube's whole front end redesign. Another one of our members ended up becoming one of the younger members of Twitter's database team, kind of getting it to a P95 performance of some crazy numbers. And we had some really, really impressive wins, like right after they worked with us, like what they were able to accomplish. And I was like, hey, that's amazing. That's a win-win-win for everyone involved.
I still have really fond memories, and I didn't work with you guys for that long either, right? But I remember again probably being bored and thinking, well, that's interesting. Let me see what I can learn. And a lot
Yeah,
of this, it's not even being hungry for money. Personally, I was never interested in money in itself, but it's that desire to learn something that you can't otherwise access, or you can do this faster. And it was
yeah,
fun, and I still love that area of Toronto. I don't know if it's changed since then, probably has.
yeah, lots.
But now that you mentioned the co-working space, yeah, I thought you guys were somewhere between a co-working space and a coffee shop or whatever space you could find at the time. But that was the exciting part, right? The unknown, the fact that you have to hack this. Like
Yeah,
going to office was very predictable. You get a desk and a chair and it's boring and it's the same. Going to a coffee shop and you don't really know what's going to happen every 10 minutes. That was the exciting part.
yeah,
That was the reason for me to even get involved with you. And I remember when I moved on to something else after a couple encounters, I was like, hey, I don't need anything. It's fine. This was exciting. And your brother was like, nah, you're like, here's a gift card or something. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
he probably tried to cover it legally, right? Like we gave him something, but I
yeah,
really,
yeah, yeah,
like for me, it really didn't matter. I was like, no, this was fun, right? Like we could stay in touch and we could do something again. All that mattered. Um,
totally. And look at
yeah,
it now, 14 years later. Hey, we're still friends. So
yes,
yeah,
exactly. It's awesome.
yeah,
So, for everyone listening, if they're younger, like I think that's if you have any sort of drive and ambition to do something different, you should just dive in and do things that are different because it pays back in all kinds of dividends that may not be financial, but it's still like it makes your life so much better and vibrant and
richer. Yeah,
colorful. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so you guys started, struggled for a while, and eventually went through this boom process where all of a sudden things started working. You got clients. Um, Tell me how far you want to fast forward. The next thing I remember is you have this fantastic office on the waterfront in Toronto, tons of people. You're growing. Like everyone's using your app. Is that kind of how fast it went?
It was, yeah, I mean, for 5, 6 years, it was incredibly fast. It was, doubling revenue, customers, employees, like every year. And it was kind of wild. Like we had venture back growth being completely bootstrapped.
Hmm.
And then at some point, it started to plateau. And I think that was just when we got really cocky and thought like, okay, we've got to figure it out. This is a formula now. We've done it for enough years. Let's start spending money and let's not be so frugal. And that was a bad idea. We spent a lot of money on that waterfront where I was like, this could have been my house. Like I could have just taken this money and lived a happily life ever. But no, we totally renovated and gutted this like class A office space and like, made it really nice because we thought we were going to hire so many more people. And then like immediately after we got into the office, it was like, oh, we didn't hit our target this quarter. And oh man, we didn't hit it again. Like, oh, okay, growth isn't happening. It's not a blip. Like, okay, we're plateauing. And then we saw the market was actually fluctuating. It wasn't just us. It was, and then we had to really understand what was happening at a much larger level beyond us in that space.
I got a quick question about the office because I was listening to David Rusenko from Weebly the other day on a podcast who said that the first time they built out this really nice office, it actually was a bit painful because they realized it impacts everybody's morale and people start feeling like, oh, they won, right? And you guys just moved from Chinatown, which is, I mean, a little sketchy, to wow, perfect location. So did you experience the same where all of a sudden people changed how they approached work? And did it impact you as well as the founder, going from just chill guy just working and to all of a sudden like, oh, I made it. I've done something important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if on the personal end, but I mean, it did like, I think that was just the nature of also the building the company to a specific size because I think you remember this. We used to do retreats way back in the day. Like this was what
Mhm.
2012 we started doing full company retreats before, that was kind of a trend now. And it was really interesting because in the early days, like up until we were 50, 55 people, it was so impactful and so important. And like it was such an amazing way of kind of bringing the company together. And then just the nature of like us growing to a certain size, I think people started taking less seriously and it was more complacency around what the value of it was and like, how they perceived it was more of a benefit that they were owed because we were, they saw it in the recruiting material rather than, hey, what can this do for my work and, the
Mm.
team and the way that we interact on a day-to-day basis. And so we eventually had to cut them because we're spending so much money trying to take, 100 people out. And then we're just seeing like nobody really gets the value in the same way again, because the perspective had changed of like why these things were being offered to begin with. And
So
so
in
I
the
think in the
early
same way,
days, people were craving work. And now that you have all the luxuries, people feel like they're entitled to luxuries as part of their work.
yeah, they were demanding that, and they're like, well, it was really funny because I think there's somebody that couldn't make it, and they're like, well, you guys say that you spend $5,000 a person on this, and I can't make it, so I wanted $5,000 on my next paycheck, and I was like, come on, like this isn't how it works. Like, and they were genuinely upset, but like this was a benefit that they weren't getting, and so they wanted to be paid out by it, and like it's interesting to see the mental shift and the dynamic of it.
Was it difficult for you to go from individual contributor to now manager of all these people?
Yeah, ultimately that was why I ended up kind of stepping away from day to day because like it was just too much. Like when you're an individual contributor, you can learn yourself and you can sit down, read books, read blog articles, go talk to people, and you can be brain smart about it. But I think people is never you can't learn from a book. You have to experience it. You have to make mistakes. You have to go through the process of learning how to communicate and, oh, this decision didn't really pan out, etc. And so that was kind of my big burnout was like, I was still 28 at the time and I had something like stupid, like 20 something direct reports at one point, and we didn't have money to hire the right mill managers. So I was just like taking on more and more and more, knowing that it's wrong, but like you just don't really have a choice as being bootstrapped and kind of having that issue. And so at some point you're like, okay, this is I'm not doing anyone a favor. I'm stunting people's growth. Nobody's getting the benefit they actually need. I'm not being the right type of leader. I'm not enjoying it. I hate this part. Like I love being an IC and doing the actual work, and now I got to be stuck in all these like people meetings and one-on-ones and stuff. And that was really really hard to rectify.
And at this point, you're 28, and I'm assuming that at least some of your employees are older than you.
Yeah,
does that create a challenging interaction? Because it's easier to tell, an 18-year-old, be like, yeah, I've made it. I'm 28 and I know stuff. But if somebody is 48, they look at you like, whoa, like, don't bother telling me what you think, kiddo. Is that, have you
Luckily, we
experienced that?
never actually. Maybe a handful of employees, but most people were really respectful, and it was a really interesting dynamic. Like, actually, the first employee we ever hired was years, maybe 30 years older than me. And so, he was already fairly senior, well off in his
Hmm.
career, and it was a very different kind of dynamic where I'm going into one-on-ones and being like, you're still teaching me one-on-one. I don't even know what I can teach you. But like, it was a really interesting dynamic where, we still, chat and we're good friends to this day. And I still learn from him, but like, we just kept that dynamic going. And it was very awkward in the beginning, but I think, people understand the situation as well. And people, as long as you're smart and driven and motivations are right, I think people respect that. I think if you're, ego-full 20-year-old that's just going bossing people around, not trying to take feedback, and then you'll get that back on you. But I was very much, I actually struggled to put the CTO title on my business card up until like 4 years in, maybe. I still just put web developer on my business card up until 4 years, and I was like, okay, I guess we're at a company size that's large enough, and like there's all these legal documents where I'm CTO, and like I should probably put it on my business card.
It's like there's a show, I forgot what it's called, but the guy who owns the company basically pretends to be a database developer within the company, and basically nobody knows what he does, and somebody bosses him around telling him, to hurry up and get his work done, and
Yeah,
he's the owner.
yeah,
That would
yeah.
be the
That's great.
ultimate way to just have the company run without any attribution. Um,
Yeah.
Well, it's good. That means you were mature enough at that point to take on the role, and you hired good people who respected everybody's position in the company and was smooth. Well,
Yeah.
it at least I'm assuming it went smoothly for a while, but like you said, then you hit a roadblock. All of a sudden, things change around you, under you, and there's an inflection point. How did you guys deal with it?
Um, it's been a tough kind of ride through that whole journey. So I mean, there's at that point you kind of also we went through a big change where for about 6 years, 5 years, we almost had zero turnover from an employee perspective. All of our early teams stayed on. We grew. Everybody loved each other. We're like still to this day all really good friends with each other. And then we started hitting these career change points for individuals where they were with us for a while. They wanted more growth or they wanted different experience. They left. The market changed. Our customers changed. We have to keep changing the team. And so I think at this point it was a learning of okay, just getting bigger doesn't mean you're breaking through and everything will be fine. It's like, oh, you get bigger, it just means the problems are now bigger and more varied. And like you're just entering the next stage and it never ends. I think at some point it dawned on us, we're like, oh no, there is no, the other side doesn't exist. It's just this constant hill that you're climbing forever. And so just understanding how to change to that. And we had to adapt quite a few times, not easily. A lot of times by force and just like,
Mm.
just having to survive. And it's been a rough go for many years, especially, when the market and the events side went through its ups and downs. COVID came through. We went from a very healthy ARR to like literally zero in 3 weeks to like no live events. Like, what are we going to do? And trying to figure out how to come back out of that, and competition and companies like Hopin coming through and blowing up the market. And so it's been there's a whole chapter of this that I've also, I mean, at that point I stepped away from the day to day that there's a lot of nuance there. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of persistence and a lot of just doubling down, trying again, keeping it going, and just figuring it out every single day to get it to a point where you can extract value from this.
But you stepped away as a CTO. Was that You already mentioned that it was difficult to manage team because you just wanted to do some work yourself. But was it partially because you realized it's that feeling of pushing a rock uphill continuously and there is no end of the mountain? You're just going to keep doing that forever? Was that?
Um, Actually, I don't say I wouldn't necessarily say that because I think that part of it is really like for most entrepreneurs, that's the fun part is like you're always the underdog. There's always a big challenge. And like every time you break through, you're like, oh, yes, this fuels me enough to keep going on this thing. I think that the problem was when you don't know the way forward and you can't figure it out or you feel like you're failing. Like I thought at that point we'd gotten to almost 10 million ARR, we had about a team of over 100 staff. I just felt like the biggest failure every day coming into work. And I was like, I don't know how to do this anymore. Like I can't figure it out. It's not easy. These people, like I can't sit on the project and physically do this work. So like I have to figure out this people side. At this point, also the startup ecosystem was really blossoming. Tons of amazing companies, especially in Toronto, poaching amazing talent. And we were still this bootstrapped kind of company, not paying top dollar salaries because we just couldn't, needing a lot of help. It was a very people intensive business, and it was we were struggling to find the best of the best, and like there was it was all around just everything was difficult. Like no middle manager, like it was not the right way to kind of attack this. And I couldn't motivate people or I couldn't set up the right roadmap. And I was failing a lot of those ways. And that was why I think I just burnt out at some point. I was like, I don't see a way forward here anymore. Like, and at that point I was working with an executive coach and she kind of put it to me first was like every week we'd come together and she was previously a COO of a very successful company. And like, she looked at me, she's like, this seems like an unsurmountable hill. Like, do you have the energy to do this? Like every week you're going to come in and like, do you want to do this? And to me, it was kind of weird where I was like, I don't know what you mean. Like, what do you mean? Do I want to do this? There is no other choice. Like, this is my whole life. Since I was 19, I've been working on this thing. What do you mean? Do I want to do this? And like, she helped me kind of untether myself and my personality and who I am from the company and its performance and what it needs. That took a while. And then once I was able to do that, it was actually a big relief of being like, oh, right, like the company will live on beyond me. And I'm doing it a disservice by trying to figure this stuff out every day and doing it poorly. And so it's better to step aside and let somebody else come in for the good of the team and company and everything else, right? Like it was just needed all around.
So inherently, you knew you wanted to step away, but you couldn't allow yourself to step away until she helped you put a plan in place, which showed you that it would be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm stubborn as well, and I always thought I would just figure it out. I'm like, you just keep grinding, you'll figure it out. And I probably could have, but I don't think it was also, again, like we didn't have the right pieces in place for me to be able to do that. And that was kind of a crutch for the team because I had, in the early days, I did all the design and UX and product management work and the engineering work and XYZ. And so anytime we had a gap, I'd just be like, okay, it's like whack-a-mole. And I'm like, all right, I'll put my hand there and I'll put my hand there and I'll figure it out. And that was actually not good as a business because as the company grows, like, is this too much? And you can lean in, but trying to get yourself involved in all that is just a recipe for disaster. And so I wanted to keep doing that, but it also just wasn't really working.
So in hindsight, do you think it was the right decision?
I think so. And I think also because for me as well, not having seen or having the confidence of like what else happens in the world and how other companies are run and what are right decisions to be made in other contexts. And I didn't have that. And so I think in that sense, it was good for me personally because it gave me some vindication of like, okay, the way I was doing some things was like actually really amazing and really forward thinking. And then some ways like, oh, I had no idea how to run this project. I was doing it really, really poorly. And if I kept pushing, it actually just would have kept getting worse and worse. And so, I mean, it's hard to say looking back, but I think ultimately, like, it still worked out well. We have an amazing team now. We've had to rebuild a lot of that stuff over. It took quite a while to get to this point, but they're performing. They're doing what they need to do, and I'm not really involved in anything at this point. And so, yeah, to that end, I mean, it's been successful.
At least it hasn't been unsuccessful, right? So like
Yeah.
your leaving did not change the trajectory for the worst. But you've mentioned that you couldn't pay top salaries because you had all this revenue, but you still have to divide it all for all the employees, right? You don't have extra money. And we've talked about this before, how maybe being fully bootstrapped wasn't the best decision. So we'll get to it eventually. You've now gotten to try other projects. You worked with venture funded startups. You've joined a VC firm at some point. So do you think was still a best decision for EventMobi to be bootstrapped, or at some point you needed to go raise capital?
I think it's difficult. So I think the industry matters, and understanding the segment and the way being able to either drive or understand where a market segment is going is kind of the key to the decision point of whether you should be bootstrapped or not. And like what is the real possibility for a company in this space, right? And so when we started out, it was an emerging space that didn't really exist. We were one of the first 3 companies to start working on doing mobile apps for events and in that space. So nobody really knew what it could be. And we proved that out. We just kept growing. We kept growing that pie over time, but that pie eventually hit a barrier of what it could be. And so we saw 3 rounds of venture-backed companies come through, raise crazy amounts of money, spend ridiculous amounts of money, like I'm having 4 or 5 mil a quarter spend to try to expand that pie and ultimately fail. And so, would venture backing have helped? I don't know. I don't. It's a space that's very difficult to really push to that venture level growth. And so, but there are tons of somewhat smaller, very, very successful companies. And so if you understand that and you play for that, then you can actually build a very successful company in itself that would have outcomes far, far better than any venture-backed company. We've had probably a dozen bootstrap companies get to 20, 25 million ARR with very, very healthy margins, very low headcount in the event space that, whether their founders are smart enough to sell at the right time is a whole different question, but, could have had a very incredible exit that would have benefited everybody far better than most venture-backed kind of companies. So again, would venture have helped? It would have helped us make better decisions because we wouldn't have been focused on just making payroll next month. But would it have ultimately grown the pie? It's hard to say. And would it have helped execute on the idea? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah.
So I saw in the news yesterday that some company that was offered to be bought by Google for $23 billion turned this down and said, we're going to grow and we're going to IPO. And in a couple of years, you'll get rich. And the questions piled in kind of imagine being an early employee, you could have had this chance, but now you have to work for a few more years at least for maybe a chance at an equal or better outcome. And I remember we were talking with you around the pandemic time where new entrants in the event space popped up. And there was a company, doesn't matter what the name was, but they, I think, started virtual events and they got bought up almost instantly for a ridiculous amount of money and then probably shut down afterwards.
Yeah.
So how do you go through that as a founder? How do you get your team to go through that experience and still, show up for work 6 months and 6 years later?
Yeah, it's so there's I think what I've learned as well is there's a lot of people that are on the startup VC backed PR train, right? Of what we're all told and what we hear about every day, and this is how companies are run, this is the playbook, et cetera, that everyone puts forward. And then a lot of employees that don't want to be founders, but they want to be part of this, latch onto this story, and then they connect themselves with, how this playbook is supposed to play out and where they're placing themselves in that playbook. So you get a lot of people who are jumping from place to place. Their expectations are around valuations and equity pools and this and that, and that's how they're planning their life is through those means. And then you realize that it's probably 70% of the rest of the individuals out there are just looking to do really, really good work with good people. They care more about the work than they do about what's happening in the startup ecosystem or VC world or whatever that is. It's hey, interesting problem, enough salary for me to take care of my family. and good people at work that I want to show up every day to. And those individuals could care less because they're not following this stuff. They just want to come to work, have somewhere stable to do their good work. And some of them are definitely 10x engineers. Some of them are just looking for a 9 to 5 and do that, and that's totally fine. And they're not looking for a $500,000 paycheck. They're happy with 120, 130, whatever it is. To do that and have that balance. So I think that goes in more into your recruiting side of things, understanding that the right type of people you need at any given time, what you're trying to accomplish, and then making sure that you're not bringing those people that are starting to gossip around like, oh, did you look? I can't believe they're paying us this much. This company raised this much money. Why isn't our leadership doesn't understand, and et cetera. And then they're not looking 5 years down the line of what's going to happen to everyone if we go down that path. They're just looking at now on the headlines and then comparing your company to everybody else's and really creating kind of an atmosphere that isn't positive for everyone as well. So, I mean, that's a huge part of recruiting is understanding people's motivation. Now, that motivation can, like I've been part of a venture-backed company where we did find these individuals, we brought them in, they cared about that stuff, but they used that for their own self-motivation to like really do an extra grind to like get the company's valuation to a certain point so that they could benefit. And that was really good in that sense. Like it was, and I'm not saying these are good or bad things, but like that company was going for a big win. It wasn't really satisfied with, 20 million ARR. Like they were like 300 million or nothing. Like, let's go. And you need these sort of people that are willing to put in it all to make that happen. Right.
So it sounds like if you want stability over a long term, you got to hire those people, just like in the early days, people who just want to be curious, want to work on this, where the outcome is not as important as what you're doing in the now.
Yeah,
but at
exactly.
the same time, if you recognize that some people are driven by different stimuli, then you can use them wisely, and they'll be happy. They'll be very happy to be used that way.
Yeah, and I think it's again, it's just motivation, right? And so I think a lot of the recruiting processes, and I think this is when people are talking about, do you find people who are the best at what they do, or have the aptitude, or like have the drive, and like a lot of that culture fit stuff that we talk about is really just like, what is your motivation? Like, why do you want to do this? Is actually a really important factor, because that will feed into what the company needs, what your personal growth is going to look like at the company, and all those areas that I think a lot of people skip through. They just look at the skill test and then to see if they should join the company or not. And I'm like, that's a very, very small part of like what's going to make this person successful at the company.
Try not to attract your employees with waterfront properties, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess enough of EventMobi. That was a good experience. We'll leave it to your brother to run it for the next 20 years. I guess one more thing is that the plan? Do you like? I mean, obviously, if you offered enough money, you will probably sell to the right buyer. But is that so far the plan? The company is working; it's doing what it's supposed to do. So he's just happily running it with, I'm assuming, the new executive team.
Yeah, the team is really good. They're doing a great job. The market is still receptive to what we need. There's obviously issues all over. That never ends. There's always issues, whether it's good times or bad. So I think it's really about, okay, well, if we find the right buyer, the right strategic buyer that we're not interested in selling to PE in that sense, and kind of where the lockup comes in. Like after 14 years, you don't want to have 5 years of handcuffs again to deal with. And so I think the right strategic buyer comes along. It's always a discussion to be like, okay, let's entertain it and see where it can go. But otherwise, it's like, hey, it's a profitable company. It's good. Everyone's doing good work. They like showing up to work every day. It's a fun product to work on, so why not? Let's just keep it going. Because I mean, now that you've seen what it takes, and I think like get a company off the ground, you're like, what? Like just like crush this for no reason go to the grind all over again. Like it's good to see this through in the best possible way.
Makes sense. But if somebody offered, 50 million per founder and wrote a check tomorrow with no handcuffs, I'm sure you'd be like, okay,
yeah, exactly.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So after you stepped down as a CTO of EventMobi, you did this really cool thing where for a while you were a fractional CTO.
Yeah.
to a number of startups. What was that experience like for you? Because you're kind of a big shot for a while, um, to some extent.
Yeah.
Even if you're kind of worried about your own performance every day, but still, you're a CTO of a long-running company with a lot of recurring revenue, and all of a sudden, you just step back and say, "You know what? I'm happy to offer my services to anybody." Was that a big
Yeah.
transition for you personally?
It was it took a while to figure out what that next thing was. I was so burnt out. And at the end of it, uh, when I was leaving EventMobi, like I would come into work and people would stop me in the hallway and be like, "Are you okay? Like you don't look well." And I'm like, "I just
Wow.
showing up to work. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I got things to do. I got meetings. Like, let me get out of here." And then like literally, I started having like my stress started becoming physical. Like my eyelids were peeling, my skin was peeling. I was getting psoriasis. Like it was really really bad. Couldn't get up that like and be motivated anymore. And yeah, at the end it was pretty rough. And so when I stepped away, it was good. And but I felt like a complete failure at this point. Like I gave up, right? And that was really tough. And so what I planned for myself was just a year of travel, but like really challenging stuff, like not just go sit on a beach somewhere. And so I challenged myself, and most of my life I've been a city kid, and especially, I mean, the whole my 20s was working on this thing. So I've been to downtown offices. Like I haven't really done that level of pushing myself in my body. And so I planned to go to uh, Patagonia, did like hikes there that were like 7-day treks and like really, really tough, which, now I'm like, it's totally fun. Back then it was like, what? Like, I've never even done a one nighter, like, to now go immediately into a 7-nighter in the mountains. Got my diving certifications, and I'm scared. I couldn't swim really properly at the time. So like going, learning that and getting diving certifications and like all sorts of kind of mental challenges for me to tick off the boxes to be like, okay, I am capable. I can do stuff. I can challenge myself and I can do things. And then once I figured out, okay, well, I have too much PTSD. I don't want to go back to Toronto. Also, Silicon Valley at this point was starting to take a downturn. And I was like, I don't know if I want to set up there now. So let me go back to somewhere in the middle, which was Vancouver, kind of still in Canada, really nice. I could always go back to Toronto if I want to, but I'm close enough to the Valley and what's next that I could kind of play those cards. And that was where I came in and I was like, oh, I really want to do something really, really early stage. Like I'm interviewing with these bigger companies. And I was thought I would take it easy for a while. And I hate the interview process. I suck at interviewing. And it just really was too stressful in itself that I was like, okay, I got to go back to early stage because like, it's
And
just easier.
the goal to interview at this point was literally just so you can get like a nice stable job and coast for a while and de-stress and do things around you and like in regular life for a bit.
Part of that, yeah. And then part of it is just like, okay, well, um, that we can actually like learn from people that are at a next stage than what I got to. If I got to
Mm.
150 employees, I'm gonna go work at a place that was 500 employees, and see what that was like and learn from them, and kind of go through that process. So that was kind of where I tried, very quickly realized wasn't going to be a fit, and then went back to, okay, well, how do I work with startups again, but like make money? And the biggest problem, especially in doing startups in Canada, is like very little money in the early stages, and so. A lot of people need a lot of help. I think that's where I really saw the opportunity, but just like very hard to figure out how to monetize that. And at that point, the fractional CTO thing wasn't really a thing yet. It was mostly just dev shops. And so anyone I talked to, they're like, oh, where's your dev team? Like, how many people do you have? I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, it's fractional CTO. This is like strategic advisory, sitting with you as a founder, helping you make the right decisions and planning with you rather than like just offshoring something. But I realized that was something that was needed, and I kind of was determined to figure it out. But in the same way, like I went into it accepting like, $1,000 month contracts, and then eventually kind of found the right type of customers to go into. And then it's been probably about 24 different companies now over the 6 years that I've kind of helped out. Everything from pre-seed to Series B. Some of them we raised a good amount of money and grew very significantly. Gave me a lot of different understanding of, okay, how do other CEOs make decisions? How do other industries, how are they run? What do different dev teams look like? Can you actually alter? Like, it gave me a lot of actually exposure, which was great. And it was fantastic because it wasn't my company to like take the stress on every day. Whereas like, I can sit with the founder, work through the problems, but like I didn't have to go to sleep with the problems, which is great.
Right. So you can be very strategic. I've noticed it when I give advice, when people ask for it, it's so easy, right? Because you're disconnected from the emotions of the business and you can see
Yeah,
it clearly. And
yeah, exactly.
sometimes I'll say something and I'm like, oh, I know people have told me to do the same thing or giving me the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
advice, but you interpret the advice, you're just like, oh, geez, that's so much work or something else, right? And it's just scary. Saying to somebody else, like, oh, I could do it
yeah.
all day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then so I mean, but I enjoyed that for quite a while, and then it started to get really stale. Where I was like, okay, I want to own the problem. Like it's hard kind of just giving it to somebody else and just giving advice, right? And that was kind of got stale for after a couple of years, and you just realize everybody is dealing with the same problem in just a slightly different way, and then that becomes boring. Just going in and solving that same problem again and again and again, and a lot of the work as a consultant also is just trying to um, convince and build rapport that like, yes, this is the way forward and this is the right way, the best practice, and like train everybody up and go and like, okay, like, can we just get to the work, please? Like, this is kind of slowing everything down, but that's just the way of being a consultant and
Right. You
doing
want
that.
them to be comfortable, even though you know it will take you 10 hours to explain what 10 minutes should do. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's part of the role. So I kind of did that for a while, and then I got lucky where Antler Canada was getting off the ground, was connected to them through the GP's former CTO, who knew me, and I was part of the startup ecosystem. So it was a natural fit because it was just like, hey, help our portfolio companies out as a venture partner and help them get off the ground. And that was really fun, and it was interesting to see that side of view of getting a little bit more into the venture side. Um, and then I got really into it where I was like, okay, we were planning on opening an incubator in Vancouver. We had some LPs kind of lined up, and so we had the whole programming set up of like, how do we launch and what's the playbook to launch companies. And then COVID hit, and that whole thing kind of fell apart. Um, I ended up finding with one of my best friends an opportunity to actually potentially start an early stage VC fund with an LP that was very, very wealthy and kind of gave us a huge opportunity. We tested a thesis that didn't really play out, but that was also like really got me understanding the mechanics of VC, which was actually really cool. And now I think I came at it with like a very interesting perspective of, okay, I've like been a bootstrap founder where like you've been in the grind, figured out how to do every part of the role yourself before you hire somebody. I've been part of a venture-backed company now. One of my clients, which I joined full-time, where like you saw what the expectations are when you raise 60 million, and you have a great VC, but pushing you constantly for growth, and how that plays out. And now I've actually looked at it from a VC angle of how their mechanics need to work. When they actually give investment, and how you actually need to approach that. And so at some point, I kind of felt like it clicked in my head of kind of how the system works, and then the AI wave came through. So that was kind of my thing of like, oh, okay, this is perfect. Like, I'm tired of giving advice. I understand how everything works, and now there's this whole new tidal wave that's going to shift everything all over again. This is mobile all over again, and now I'm a new founder coming in again, but like with all this knowledge. And so I got really, really excited to just jump in with both feet and figure it out. And then I very quickly realized how hard it is in the early days, and realized how much of a mistake it was. Because it's like, no matter how much it's just those early days like really suck. And it's just such a grind. And so and especially when you're coming at something new in a new space, and as nascent as AI was 2 years ago when I stepped into it as well, which I thought I was super early in, and then I immediately thought, I'm like, oh man, I'm so late and I don't understand what's going on, and now it's kind of leveling out. But it's a lot of stress to take on all over again.
That's actually interesting with AI because I'm in similar shoes to you right now, right? Jumping into AI because realizing how exciting it is, and I'm generally excited about it. If you think of the last 10 years with the whole Web3 and all of that, I was entirely not into it, and I didn't want to talk about it or try to do anything. And you could see how much money there was in it. It's just personally, it wasn't interesting enough to actually commit to it. With AI, it's entirely different because I think there are real changes that you can make to life around you, and you can see them the next morning, right? You can code something today, which will change it tomorrow, and it's entirely like exciting opportunity. You can do what you did early with EventMobi, where you can hire people that
Yeah.
they just want to work because it's cool, not
Yeah.
just because there might be money there later. But it's difficult. So let's talk about this, right? Like, how do you have to mentally focus on what you're trying to do in order to get over those pain points? Because when you're doing it for the first time, it's difficult, but you don't know, right? You're just suffering through it. 10
Yeah.
years later, you look back, you're like, oh, that was not fun. So
Yeah, exactly.
what do you do now to power through it to make sure you can actually come out on the other end?
I think the best part about this is at least I have perspective that I didn't used to have. So I kind of have the same stress, but then I can very quickly be like disassociate myself from the day to day and be like, all right, this is how it would play out. Do I want that stress or do I not? And then I can choose where to engage, right? The fog of war is far less than it used to be. And I think that makes it a lot easier to figure out where I want to place my bets versus before you're just like frantically trying to put any bet anywhere to see if anything takes off, right? And now I can be a little bit more thoughtful about it, and that helps with alleviating the stress around it. But the thing is, like, you don't control the market, and you don't control customer actions, and you don't control competitors, and so that part is always going to be stressful. And I think AI has its own challenges that weren't there in mobile, like how fast it takes to get a product to market, the amount of competition, the amount of eyes in the space, and the amount of change in the underlying technology. These are all things that I couldn't have anticipated. And so, what I did in the first, couple months, I got a beta out. I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like, this actually has value. Um, Realized it was a little too early for a lot of customers to really understand what it could do because AI, like ChatGPT, had just come out and people are trying to figure out how to use it. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm early enough that if I can figure out how to do some core AI models to get them to do certain actions, then I will be like far ahead of the curve. I went to CVPR, which is a computer vision kind of research. So top researchers there started really learning and figuring out. Met the Midjourney team that like trained the model. Met like these amazing researchers. One realized that like they also don't necessarily know what's happening. And like they're trying to keep up with learning. And like, I have no hope if I don't have a PhD in the subject. Like if an actual PhD who spent 15 years of their life in this space can't figure it out, like okay, this is maybe the wrong thing to go after. And then I just realized like how many people are going to be focused on pushing the underlying technology and how that's a very different game than trying to build the end user application or like what customers are trying to do. Um, and so I very quickly took that beta that I built and I leveraged it to open customer conversations, but I didn't really put more focus on building it. It was more about, okay, let's focus less on what AI can do and more about what it enables for businesses and like trying to line up with where customers' expectations are and then finding the right opportunity to jump into. So I mean that took, again, like it's crazy how fast time flies, but it's been like, let's say a year and a bit to wait and talk and talk and talk with like a really shitty beta that you have and really frustrating customers and lots of churn and really low price model. But now we've gone to a point where we found a big enough opportunity that we're like, okay, this is something worth spending time on, and we still are early enough that we can tackle this.
It's interesting because you say it, we end up back in the beginning of where we started this episode, where it really, people look at the social network movie, right? And they're like, oh, startups are exciting. I mean, I date myself by even saying social network movie because it's
Yeah.
come out like over 10 years ago. But, like, wow, Zuckerberg, Facebook, lots of money, everything is crazy fast. But like, even you with your new product is back in the old days where, oh, it was going to take a few years to iterate, to grind through it until you find something that really works. So that's one thing. And two, I think product founder fit is so important. Like you mentioned, you can't really train the models and do what the PhDs do because it's so much learning that you need to put in first. So you just got to figure out, what do you know, what's available, what can customers get out of an intersection of all these things,
Yeah.
and go that way. But luckily, I think this is where the beauty of the large space is, because AI is growing so fast. There's so much opportunity that you will probably find something,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
if you don't know everything, because like
Yeah.
no one can take on everything. I've seen some companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars with a promise on kind of taking, doing everything. And I
Right.
question whether they can, because there's only so few people who actually understand this, willing to work on this, do a good job at this, right? At some point, you're like actually constrained by people. And we can say
Yeah.
that AI will write a lot of this code, but still, it's hard to say like how much AI you can power through with the people you've got. So, do you want to, just as a last thing, tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Yeah. I mean, it's shifted around now to, I think that the core problem that we're solving and the customers that we're solving are this problem where a lot of retailers and distributors of products have these massive catalogs that they have to manage. And, at first I thought, what I had started out with was, what can AI do? And you immediately jump to the marketing sales side of, okay, helping you sell more products and that sort of thing. And then you're like, okay, then that's kind of surface level and everybody can do that. And the competition is high. Price affinity is fairly low. And an expectation for the product is actually usually overinflated. And so where's the real problem here? And we just started looking at, what do they do at a human scale that is really, really time consuming, right? When you go to these, Home Depot, and you go to these really, even your small local Main Street, retailer, what is time consuming for them? And a lot of that is all this data entry work of trying to keep things up to date. And, oh, we got this new product in, and how do we get that, to start being sellable? And there's a lot of what they do is they outsource to BPOs, or like offshore kind of human process workflow teams. And I'm like, okay, this is actually a really big issue. This is work that nobody wants to do. It's really grind work. It's all data entry. And if it could offset them and allowing these teams to open up this time, it would literally change the face of the business, because they could handle so many more products at such a higher quality. The shopping experience would be totally different. And the margins it would open up for these retailers would be huge. Where right now, as a macroeconomic side, you're like, okay, well, the trend is that retail is hurting really bad. And you're starting to see that across the board. And like they're looking for help. So like if you can provide a solution, then that's a good place to like put your time and eggs in that basket. And we found that we were effectively really good also at this problem space, because of my knowledge of like, okay, how to dig into understanding that space in general, but also how to dig into deeper customer problems that if I was a younger entrepreneur, I just would have surface level been like, oh, I don't know, that's too hard. I don't understand. Like, you don't dig deep enough to really uncover these bits. Where, and especially my co-founder I've brought on now, Rob, he's like fantastic at this. And I'm like, all right, this is our opportunity. This is what we're going to do better than everybody else. Is like, we can dig deep into these like really gross problems that nobody really wants to touch. Really boring work, but it's like perfect for AI.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is like, once you bring it together, like a lot of the 5, 6 early kind of design partners that we have, it's just magic to them. They're just like, what? Like, you can actually do this? Like, holy crap! Okay, let's get this person involved. Let's get this team involved. Let's get everyone. I didn't realize this could actually be done this well, and that's what you want to get to. And now that gave us like totally renewed energy to like retackle this all over again and say, okay, well, last year and a half was a wash. That's okay. But like, this is the thing now. And it led us to this. And I think that's the thing. You kind of have to go through those waves, especially when there's this early emergence of tech, to really find that thing. And then now we can organically kind of grow from here. And hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be in a position where we might fall into that thing again, where, we get the product good enough to a point where these customer contracts are valued high enough where we can actually bootstrap this thing and keep it going, or raise one round, and then not need to raise again because the value of these contracts are so high and they keep building on each other. And then we don't have to build an unsustainable company. Like I don't really want to. I don't aspire to do that VC train at all. But I do want to build a good, lasting company that's actually doing really amazing work.
That's fantastic. You've put all of your learning experiences into this new vision and a new vector for yourself. And you're in a position where you can kind of align yourself to where you need to go without stress, like all the super stress imposed with VC. So that's fantastic. But let's just say, everything you know now, and a young entrepreneur is listening to us, this AI boom is happening. What do you think they should do best in order to maximize their chances of some kind of success right now?
Yeah, and this is an important piece of understanding the timing, right? And you can't predict timing, but you can understand timing. And we talk about the greats learning from history books and then figuring out their playbook. So I think there's one bit of knowledge to look back since the dot-com boom and understand the cycles that happen, and then understand where we are in that cycle and how to position yourself. When there's a time of difficulty macroeconomic wise, people are always looking for change, right? They're afraid, they're hurting, they're looking for something new. And so the aptitude towards jumping onto new technology is quite a bit higher, which gives you opportunity, especially someone who's in tech and wants to build something new. To do that, you have to be a builder. There is no other way around it. You have to come up with some new innovation, some new way, rework some existing process in a different way, repackage it up, put it out in front of someone. And so right now is the time to be a builder. For the next few years, it's just like get in the grind, figure out how to build and still talk and have that customer sense. But I think building is more important than the sales side. It'll swap over at some point. And then we'll get back into, okay, everyone understands AI models, everyone knows what they can do, and now you're looking for incremental improvement gains over something that was done, or like slight process changes where if you can be 10% better than the other model, there's a business opportunity, or even 5% would give you a leg up, or 5% as a UX kind of change even would be benefit to some customers. And then it becomes a sales game of convincing somebody to pay you for that 5%. But like right now, it's like, this is a fundamentally new paradigm that are going to be coming to every industry, and you have to be a builder right now to get anything done. And so, and I've been seeing this, and I love this because all of my old entrepreneur friends from 14 years ago that we all started our companies together, and everybody spawned off, became big shot, whatever, executives or whatever. They've all left and they're all builders again. And everyone's like, okay, this is it. Like we all understand that cycle of like, you can't get away from it. I can't be an executive again and just talk to people and boss people around because nobody knows what the right answer is. And if I'm just secondhand giving an answer to somebody else to do something and I don't understand the nuance of it, like it's just immediately doomed to fail. And I think this is also part of why some of the big companies are really going to struggle with just slapping on AI features without really changing the game, is because they have executives that are just reading secondhand about what AI is and what it can do, and then putting a roadmap in front of their team to execute on without knowing or understanding the low-level details, which is important, at least for the next while everything's changing.
That's awesome advice and sort of perspective on the next couple of years, because that puts power back into the builder ecosystem, right? Back to Zuckerberg and building something that could be really cool, and hopefully you can do it fast enough where you can get your company in the right point where sales can be done later. Yeah. And the way I think about it, like we have to envision what the future looks like again, given these tools, build that, and then show it to people, because you can't exactly expect them to understand what the future might look like without being able to mold it and actually try.
Yeah. And I think, when you're, especially for the young entrepreneurs, you're like, the grind now is more, is easier than it was before, especially, if you look around you and you're like, if this was during the ZERP era, during COVID, where like everybody's making crazy salaries, spending money on all sorts of random things they shouldn't be, and then you have to go and like sleep on the ground again and eat hot dogs and that sort of thing, and then you're like, oh, this sucks. Like I don't want to do this. Everybody else is having fun. Now it's like, hey, everybody's stuck in this thing. This is the best time to have no FOMO. Just be like, you know what? embrace the suck and just get the grind going and like just hunker down and build something interesting and not care about the money, because nobody is making money right now. Like everyone's scared for their job and everyone's scared economically. Who cares? Just drop it and like go down to basics again, build something, because then you're going to come out at a perfect time. And hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of that and actually then personally benefit quite a bit from that as well.
It's a great time to embrace the suck. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Bijan, for coming on the pod. It's been awesome. I think we're going to do a follow-on episode because I want to talk to you about the technology and break that down. But thank you for sharing your story. I hope folks get inspired and start building, start learning, and we end up with a ton of amazing AI startups on the horizon.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's good chatting again.
Likewise.
Okay.